This is about the country's basic stability and security. We have seen since the February election that the government has tried to engage in a dialogue with the extremist elements, particularly those in northwest frontier, the tribal areas, and it has failed. And Pakistan right now is suffering the consequences of a pincer movement. Instability in Afghanistan, pressure from the United States, and the one thing Pakistan needs is a credible, stable government.
Well, Stephen, there are two different things now. One is a question of the future of Pakistan democracy, which hinges on an independent justice system. Because that would mean an independent election commission, that would mean free and fair elections, that would mean a check on abuse of power, which we've never had before. The other issue, of course, is this war on terror, which has created these problems on Pakistan's tribal areas, and then the fallout inside Pakistan. They're two different things.
The two are inextricably linked. I mean, you cannot tell me...
They're not linked.
You cannot tell me that the presence, for example, of Baitullah Masood, the leader of the Taliban in Pakistan, is not a destabilizing factor across your country's politics.
Yeah, but it has nothing to do with the justice system. This is a direct fallout of this war on terror which has spilled over into Pakistan. Actually, Musharraf towing the US lines, sending the Pakistan army into our tribal areas, breaking the treaty with the tribal areas which was signed in 1948. So when he sent the army in...
Hang on a minute. I mean, we're talking about Al-Qaeda, we're talking about the Taliban in Pakistan, people who are intent on destroying the Pakistani government in Islamabad, and more particularly also sending weapons, fighters, and a war across the border into Afghanistan. And you think it's okay just to leave them to it?
No. I think that it's the way this whole war on terror is being fought. It's creating more terrorists. It's not, it is an unwinnable war. By losing the hearts and minds of the people, it doesn't matter how many Taliban you kill, they are being replaced. In my opinion, if the original enemy was Al-Qaeda, Taliban was not the enemy. Taliban were fundamentalists, but they were not terrorists. Al-Qaeda was the enemy. In my opinion, initially the biggest mistake was made that they should have isolated Al-Qaeda and not bombed the Taliban and actually turned them on the other side. Let me just come to the Pakistan side. Look, Pakistan had nothing to do with 9/11. No Pakistani was involved in it. There was no problem in Pakistan's tribal area. The problem was in Afghanistan. Now, as a result of this, the bombing in Afghanistan and the war in Afghanistan, there was supposed to be between 800 to 2,000 supposed Al-Qaeda in Pakistan. That's how this whole thing started. In my opinion, we should have had a dialogue with the tribes and told them to either deliver them or to neutralize the Taliban. There is a mess in the tribal area. I'm just trying to make you explain how did this mess occur. When initially this so-called Al-Qaeda moved into Pakistan between 600 to 2,000, that's all. Remember, in the tribal area, there are 1 million armed men. Now, if it was a question of 2,000 people, surely we should have used the tribes to either contain them, eliminate them in the beginning. But where did it go wrong? It went wrong because by bombing the tribal area, by sending in our troops there, who used helicopter gunships to bomb villages, we ended up turning the tribal people who had nothing to do with Al-Qaeda or Taliban, we ended up turning them against Pakistan army and over to the Taliban side. So Pakistani Taliban were created, which did not exist before 9/11.
But the question is what to do now. And I just ask you very simply, Baitullah Masood, who's become the symbol of the Taliban inside Pakistan, he gave a press conference on Pakistani soil not long ago in which he said he is committed to sending more fighters, more weapons, more attacks over the border into Afghanistan. We also know he's launching attacks inside Pakistan against Pakistani military forces. What would you say to him? When you talk of dialogue, what is your dialogue with him about?
You must know what actually happened. Once the Pakistan army went in and started sort of bombing villages and so on, there were at one point over 100,000 refugees out of Waziristan. So imagine the sort of carnage that must have taken place. Then started the backlash. The whole tribal structure got destroyed. There was no one to talk to in the tribal area. It's not a question of Baitullah Masood alone. There are a lot of small groups now, militant groups operating within the tribal area. There's not one group you're dealing with. And because the tribal structure has been destroyed, who do you talk to now? And so the dialogue has become pretty difficult. It's not an easy thing.
Pretty difficult is an understatement. Truces have been tried, both by Musharraf and since the new government came into power by them as well. They have failed. We have seen the extremists and the militants gain ground. So truces aren't going to work.
Stephen,
and you say, hang on a minute, you say, apropos Pakistan's ties with America, you say those ties must be cut. You accuse George Bush, I'm quoting a word of yours, of being moronic, and you say the Pakistani government, quote, is massacring its own people under directions received from Washington. So you just wash your hands of the strategic alliance with the US.
On 9/11, Pakistan should have done everything to help the Americans who had faced those terrorist attacks. But the way we should have done it should have been debated within Pakistan. Because we had a military dictator, he unilaterally led us into this war on terror, which has created, there were 65 suicide bombings in Pakistan last year. 5 times more Pakistani troops have died today in Waziristan than American troops in Afghanistan. Just out of Waziristan, there were over 100,000 refugees. Look at the carnage this country has suffered because of this. And it's not getting any easier. It's getting worse. The reason why Pakistan decided to try dialogue was because they were losing the war. They were losing soldiers. Soldiers were giving up in the tribal areas.
But it didn't work.
No, but it is the only solution. It didn't work because we've created a mess there. If this war on terror has to be, if there's ever going to be a result out of it, it will be through dialogue. It will not be through this carnage, this destruction. And you're talking about George Bush, I call him a war criminal. What he has done into this world, starting from in Iraq, over almost 1 million people killed. In Afghanistan, every day, women and children dying in bombings. In Somalia, what he has done, I mean, he's a war criminal.
But this isn't just about George Bush. Soon George Bush will be history. There'll be Barack Obama or there'll be a President McCain. Neither of them is likely to want to see Pakistan entering into an open-ended dialogue with militants, including the Taliban, and Pakistan, which is simply saying it no longer wants a strategic alliance with Washington.
What I hope is that we have an American president who actually has a better understanding of the world than George Bush had, looking at the world in black and white, good and evil. Whatever they were doing was good. Whoever was opposing them or opposing their policies was evil. I hope there's someone with intelligence in dealing with this war on terror, because the root of every terrorist activity anywhere in the world is politics. And political issues are solved politically through dialogue. They're never solved through bombing and killing more and more people, driving more and more people on the other side. Well, you know, US is a superpower. You talk to them, you hold dialogue, you put forward your point of view, but you don't become a lackey, a slave, like what General Musharraf did to Pakistan. So what is the net result of this war on terror? There are more terrorists today. There's no end to this war. Pakistan is being destabilized. Their suicide bombing is in Pakistan. You're creating future nurseries for terrorists. You will have more 9/11s after this. Where is it ending?
And Mr. Musharraf,
and there's no end in sight.
And Mr. Musharraf's still in power.
Because he's been backed, sadly, by the Bush administration.
Imran Khan, we have to leave it there. But thank you for being on Hard Talk.